بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين اللهم لك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على عبدك ورسولك محمد بن عبد الله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. We begin as we always do by praising Allah Azza wa Jalla and thanking Him. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala infinitely and abundantly. We thank Allah Azza wa Jalla for every and each one of the blessings that He has given us. We thank Allah Azza wa Jalla for every sajda that we've made, for every ayah of Quran that we read. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of community, the blessing of Miftaah. We thank Allah Azza wa Jalla for the team at Miftaah who works hard every single day, without exception, to make programs like this succeed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward them beyond their wildest dreams. And you, my dear brothers and sisters who are here, disrupted your life, came out to be in a gathering in which we study the personalities of our tradition, our heritage, in the era of people trying to find identity, people trying to find culture, people trying to connect and understand who they are. We know who we are and who we ought to be through the examples of those that came before us. And we are blessed to have a great lineage of scholars, exemplars that we have, role models that we have, and amongst them is the four Imams. And so we thank Allah Azza wa Jal for the great Imams of our tradition, including Al-Imam Al-A'zam, Al-Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, as well as the Imam that we will be discussing today, Imam Dar al-Hijrah, the Imam of the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I didn't just pack up and start driving back to Chicago. It is enough to say he is Imam Dar al-Hijrah. He is the Imam of the city of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. One of the names of the city of the Prophet alayhi wa sallam is Dar al-Hijrah. The home of those who migrated and the home of the greatest batch of people to ever migrate. The Sahaba Kiram, the Muhajirin. And so he was the Imam of Al-Medina al-Munawwara. And so inshallah ta'ala, we will be discussing his life today. And we cannot begin a gathering like this without sending salawat upon our teacher, our beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Our teacher in every element of our life, our role model in who we are and who we ought to be, our example with our families, our healing from our trauma, everything that he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has been and continues to be in our life. And as Allah Azza wa Jal described him in the Quran, that he is la'ala khuluqin azim, that he is upon the best of character, and spending time not just with him, but even spending time with the likes of Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala radiyan, those who knew him and those who loved him and those who studied his statements and became like him. Even that is an act of ibadah. So your presence here, your sitting here, your listening, your reflection, your internalization, this is in fact a testament to your love of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Because why do we love Al-Imam Al-A'zam, Imam Abu Hanifa? Why do we love Imam Dar al-Hijrah, Al-Imam Malik? Why do we love these people? We love them out of our love for Allah, and we love them out of our love for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And that's a part of the Prophet ﷺ being sirajan munira, a shining lantern of light. That the light of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam is such a profound light, such a radiating light, that his light sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that's gifted to him by Allah Azza wa Jal is shining through people that never met him. How incredible is that? And you, my brother, and you, my sister, could be those people who the light of the Prophet ﷺ, the light of his sunnah, the light of his seerah can shine through you. And so we are spending some time with an individual, a role model, a master, an imam, who shined within himself and within his life the legacy of the Prophet salawatullahi wasalam alayhi, and that is Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an. And it is important for us to recognize that this series is particularly dear to my heart and is in many capacities dear to the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that we study the lives of the Imams because we are a community in desperate need of leaders. We're in a community that is in need of role models. And we are only where we are in difficulties and obstacles because we lack those portraits of perfection. We lack those inspirational individuals that we can lean on. And so by becoming more informed, and I know I sound like a broken record, so forgive me, but becoming more informed of our legacy, of our heritage, of our roots, of these identities, my dear brothers and sisters, it's not just a role model for you. It's a role model for your younger sibling who's an entrepreneur. It's a role model for your mother who's making food at home. It's a role model for your blue-collar father who's working night and day. It's a role model for people that are in need of repentance. When you find the likes of Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad and others who made a complete turn in life, changing the course of their life when they were highway robbers and they were causing harm, and some of them were addicted to substances, and they changed course of their life significantly to become some of the greatest scholars of our tradition. How does that happen? That happens when we are able to really cherish our tradition, recognize the individuals in it, and place them as our role models, and become so literate in their journeys, in their struggles, that even when I see a friend of mine, a relative of mine, a cousin of mine, a parent of mine, whoever it may be, even just a coworker, I see within them the ability to become great like the Imams before us. No matter where in the story of their life they are, there was an Imam who lived through something like what they're living through right now. And the U-turns back to Allah that then give birth to Islamic scholarship, to people becoming some of the greatest ulama of our deen, they are things that repeat in my life and yours. And when we're able to know the lives of others, we can actually avoid it taking so long for us to better our own relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of this to say that we need to know these. It's not nice to know the story of Imam Malik. It's not fun to know why Imam Abu Hanifa became who he was. This is something that our community needs today. We need to know our Imams, because that's why we call them our Imams. How else are they going to be your Imam when you can't find them at the ICD, and you can't find them at a Miftaah workshop, and you don't see them at the Ummah programs? They are our Imams today, over 1,000 years for some of them after they were living, or at least 900 plus years, because their legacy, their impact remains alive today. And we as an Ummah are just as in need of them today as the days that they were breathing on this earth. All of this, as you've heard me say it before, an introduction to the introduction, and as a reminder of the role of these Imams in our lives. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to be pleased with them and to be pleased with us, and that because He is pleased with us and pleased with them, that He unites us together in the gardens of Jannah. Say Ameen. I love that Michigan energy. Tabarakallah. As I was driving here, I was reflecting on Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, and one of the things that is really unique about Imam Malik is obviously that he was Madani. He was from Medina. And like this is like the staple of the Malikiyah. They're like, no, y'all can say whatever you want, but we're from Medina. And we're not just from Medina. We wear that as our, like that's their cape, that's their, everything about them is rooted in this honor of Medina, this integrity and dignity of Medina. And so Imam Malik was born in Medina, and while there are numerous opinions surrounding when he was born, the strongest of them is that he was born in the 93rd year after Hijrah. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, in fact, his origin was that he was Yemeni. So he is of Yemeni origin, and it is in fact his grandfather that migrated from Yemen to Al-Madinah. And what we know is that his family was one that had migrated to Medina to be close to the tradition of Islam and to the minba, or like the source of knowledge and the source of guidance, to the extent that it shows on who they are. You know, like people will move to like Dallas so that they can get from the barakah of Dallas. I'm not going to say whether I sign on the dotted line on that or not, People may even be guided to move to Chicago. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all, right? People will do all sorts of things, but then you'll see that they go to that place and they're just living their average everyday lives and nothing has changed. And that's why we remember the statement, إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لَا تُقَدِّسُ أَحَدًا, that a land does not make anyone holy. That someone that wishes to be righteous or holy, they can find that righteousness or holiness wherever Allah Azza wa Jal places them. Maybe you will have different access points to knowledge, to resources, but we know, subhanAllah, that people that wish to know this deen, particularly in our day and age, that they will do whatever it takes to become the people of the deen, right? And so Imam Malik, his grandfather and his family, it shows in their true colors that they were a people that truly did not secondarily migrate for knowledge. They did not tertiarily make their move all the way there just for the sake of Islam, but instead it was the number one reason and the main reason why they moved to Medina. How do we know that? Because his grandfather was a scholar, and his father was a knowledgeable man, and his uncles are narrators of hadith. So it's like everyone made this huge migration to benefit, and it showed in who they are. And that's why we know the very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ إِمْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. That the people will migrate for many things. And you can have all of these nice banners as to why you chose this school or why you went to this land, but the proof is in the pudding. Where is your time going? Where is your energy going? And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, before we're even talking about the birth of Imam Malik, we witness very clearly that Imam Malik comes from a family that was committed to knowledge. And why am I starting from there before even his birth? Is because as much as we like to be the black sheep or the ugly duckling of our family, where we are the most, maybe the most religious or the most practicing or the most learned, where we are going against the grain of who our families are, while this may seem like a cool thing in your 20s, and it may be even a tolerable thing in your 30s, when you begin to have your own family, it actually makes life difficult. It makes it complicated. When you are not part of a network, a family, whether biological or chosen family, that are grounded in the tradition and valuing the tradition, it impacts your life significantly, because you still have duties towards your parents. You still have obligations towards your siblings. You still need to visit your uncles and aunties. So why am I pointing this out in this moment in the life of Imam Malik? Is because good families generally will produce good people. And families of knowledge will hire the standards of knowledge. Families of knowledge will hire the standards of knowledge. Every circumstance has its own exceptions, right? People will be the children of scholars and they will be, drunkards. Afanallah wa iyyakum. This is a reality, right? And particularly as minority Muslims living in a predominantly non-Muslim community, there is a history of highly religious parents having highly rebellious children, right? But what we're highlighting from Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala is Imam Malik became who he was because of who his family was. And so even though it's cool to be the odd one out right now by being the most religious person in your family, that is not a green light to lower the standards of who we allow our families to be. But instead to learn from that I need a spouse of a higher standard, and I need in-laws of a higher standard, and I need to raise my children at a higher standard, and I need to allow the ummah of Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to live at that higher standard. And when you do that, you will produce some of the greatest scholars of our tradition, like Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an. And not only that, but Imam Malik's family was involved in business. And his father was in a particularly unique trade where he was a custom maker of the bow and arrow. That was his thing. That he was like known in the lands of Arabia, and particularly in Medina, for his skill in making the most sturdy and the most reliable bows and arrows, right? And this was something that was very valuable to the Arabs at that time. And something that it afforded, or something that it did, is that it afforded Imam Malik not to be concerned about finances, because his father was so successful financially that he allowed his children to focus on seeking knowledge, and he said, I will fund you financially. And if I need your help with the business, then I'll let you know that I need your help with the business. And this is to let us know that more important than everyone trying to be the same person, it's actually understanding where we fit in the bigger puzzle of a community. Imam Malik's father could have been like, you know what? I'm really good at business. Nobody knows how to make a bow and arrow like me, but I really need to be sitting at the feet of scholarship 90% of my time. And what that could have done is it would have jeopardized his ability to become the extremely successful financial individual that he was. And that would have had huge ramifications on An-Nadr, the older brother of Imam Malik, as well as on Imam Malik. But the father was self-aware enough to say, I certainly value seeking knowledge, and I sit in gatherings of knowledge, and I prioritize that everyone in my family be learned in the tradition. But I also know that if I invest myself financially in succeeding, that I will afford my children the ability to become some of the greatest scholars of this land. And this is the ability to recognize what are the skills that Allah Azza wa Jal has given me so I can capitalize on them, and what are the areas of weakness that I have so that I can work on them. These two things. What are the things that come easy for me so I can maximize the potential? And what are the areas that I struggle, my weaknesses or my deficits, so that I can at least meet the bare minimum requirement that Allah Azza wa Jal has in me. Does that make sense? And so this is the strategy of the believer, because we don't function in silos. We don't function in a compartmentalized type of way, but we are also invested in the success of our family units, in our broader families, in our tribes, in our communities, and in the broader ummah as well. And if that means that I'm going to be less popular, if that means I'm going to be less known, if that means that I'm going to be behind the scenes while others are in the front scenes, because that's where Allah's gifts to them have been, right? And my gift from Allah Azza wa Jalla is that I am behind the scenes. What I am more committed to is to the bettering of the state of the ummah, and the more literate state of the ummah, and the more rectified state of the ummah, the more islah there is in the ummah, as opposed to me being elevated, because sometimes when some of us are elevated while being ignorant, that actually the ummah becomes lower. Does that make sense? And so Imam Malik's father was so committed to the success of the ummah that even if it meant him having less access to knowledge himself, even though he was a student of knowledge and he loved seeking knowledge, but he gave his time to business. And this is just a reminder for us to be balanced in our approach, and also to take checks and balances of what opportunities Allah Azza wa Jal has given to us. One of the things that's worth noting about the father of Imam Malik, and again, we haven't even touched upon his personality, it is that one of the things that's not very often discussed about Imam Malik's father is that even though he was this amazing tradesman who made these super sturdy and reliable bows and arrows, you just compare that to being like the inventor of like the iPhone 15 or what have you, is that in fact the father of Imam Malik was at least partially paralyzed. Subhanallah. He had a physical disability, and he did not allow that physical disability to prevent him from working and earning and teaching in a way that afforded his children a better life. For some of us, when we hit a rock in a hard place, when we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, in a very circumstantial situation, one that's going to pass us, right? We give up on the things that matters. We give up on the things that are most important. Imam Malik's father, became paralyzed at some point of time in his life, and it was increasing in paralysis. And yet he continued to work, saying, I need to give this all I've got so that my children can become all of who they can be. And this is the type of sacrifice, and this is a very real thing. that we may come across life circumstances, a diagnosis, a sickness, a financial issue, the ending of a marriage, that we may be like, khalas, like my children can't become huffaz, I'm not even with their mom anymore. I just need to see them 2 days of the week and make sure that they are not dealing with depression or anxiety or attachment issues. That's, we're going to lower the bar of who our kids are. We're going to lower the bar of who we are with Allah Azza wa Jal because of things like COVID that we experienced, or because of job loss, or because of something that happened in our life. Imam Malik's father became paralyzed while he had his children and became more and more paralyzed, but it never lowered the standard of who he wanted to be for his kids, and it never lowered the standard of his own seeking knowledge journeys. And think about what that must have been like for Imam Malik as a young boy to walk out of his house with his older brother, who was also going to a halaqah of ilm, and with his father, who was also going to a halaqah of ilm, and with his uncles, who were also going to a halaqah of ilm, and with his own grandfather that was going to a halaqah of ilm. I just think about that beautiful picture of a family that was committed to knowledge no matter what obstacles they were facing. And this is something that we learn very early on from Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an. And there's a statement of his father, or the impact of his father that shows on Imam Malik that I found intriguing, which is that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, he used to encourage his students to be even involved in growing themselves in their own financial independence, to the extent that he said, you may even engage in questionable matters if it prevents you from asking people for wealth. Very different methodology than Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala had a methodology that said the worst thing possible is to engage in questionable financial transactions. Whereas Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala came from a school that said, I would rather you engage in questionable, not questionable in like 21st century. Like, remember what we said last time? We said that questionable in our age is just your way of avoiding the awkwardness of saying something is haram or wrong. When Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala says questionable, that he means it's not completely void of possibilities that may be less than ideal, right? That it may be less than ideal in some ways, that you engage in something that is less than ideal in some ways is better than for you to be in a complete financial impoverishment where you need to ask people for assistance. All of this because he wanted his students to gain financial freedom that allowed them to seek knowledge and produce children that sought knowledge. And we know that he learned this from his own father, because Imam Malik it was all about Imams being autonomous and students of knowledge having the ability to be creative in how they sought knowledge. And it shows in one of the first stories that comes to us by Imam Malik is in fact when Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala was going for a walk with his father, and likely to the masjid, and he had with him his father and his older brother An-Nadr. And An-Nadr was not very, very much older than Imam Malik, but he was older enough where it was that his brother was like advancing. Any middle children here? Anyone here a middle child besides me? Right? You know what it's like when you have an older sibling and they're kind of just like always ahead of you, because I mean, quite literally they're ahead of you in life, right? Because they kind of came here first, right? So his dad was questioning them, and he was testing out their knowledge, and he was testing out their ability to remember what they had begun to study. Because from an early on it said that Imam Malik became a hafid like before he was even 5 years old. Remember what we said? We said there's the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa al-Imam al-A'zam rahimahullah, who became a hafid and a student of knowledge far later in their life. And then there's the likes of Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Malik, that became students of knowledge from the moment that they were born. They were on this track to become ulama. And so he was testing him out in his early years, and his brother was just like, you know when you get like destroyed in like a basketball and like the score becomes awkward? It became like that. To the extent that the father of Imam Malik became agitated. And he looked at Malik and he said to him, Al-Hatka al-Hamam. He says, you've been distracted by these birds that you like to play with, an talab al-ilm. It's distracted you from seeking knowledge. It's like the that long ago version of Angry Birds, right? like instead of like the Angry Birds that distracts us today, it was like his son was like this young little boy who used to play and pet and like have fun with these birds, like these pet birds that people had, to the extent that his father said, this distracted you from what you're really supposed to be doing of seeking knowledge. And you have to think about the pre-existing relationship that existed between the father and the son, where those words from his father were received so healthily and were so valuable that it led to a completely different perspective from Imam Malik at a young age. That he didn't become traumatized by it, he didn't rebel and like go and live in his uncle's house. He said, the very next day, I went to Al-Imam ibn Hurmuz, and he said, I became his student, and I didn't leave his side for 7 years. I didn't leave his side for 7 years. Like, you know, we talk about what is one of the greatest trials of young folks in our time. Is that we have like what is referred to in like pop culture as like commitment issues. And we don't just have commitment issues in relationships, although, you know, if I had a nickel for every time that showed up, we'd have a lot of nickels in the room. But not only do we have commitment issues in relationships, we actually, before we have commitment issues in relationships with others, we have commitment issues in our relationship with ourselves. We have commitment issues with our salah. We have commitment issues in our relationship with the Quran. And that's why when we hear these things like, you know, he's a chota bachcha, right? He's a little boy. And he's like, he just got like like an Arabic we call a bahdala from his dad, right? Like he got a lecture from his dad. And he says, like, you just been busy with the pigeons, right? Like, we would just be like, my dad doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what I'm going through. He comes from a different place. He's from Yemen. I'm from Medina. He doesn't know about these pigeons and how important they are. Like, I'm never going to go back to the Shaykh again. No, he got his act together. He got him. He's like, man, my dad was right all along. And he went and he committed 7 years of his life to studying with the Shaykh. And that is the type of response that indicates Imam Malik having a healthy relationship with himself at a young age, and Imam Malik having a healthy relationship with his father, or when his father called him out, he was able to receive that criticism from his father, and he responded to it in the best way possible. To the extent that he narrated a hadith from his father, and he narrated a hadith from his uncle Abu Suhail, and he narrated hadith from his other uncle, and all of this to indicate to us that he was someone that made do with the resources that he had, and he used that moment at a young age. And some of the narrations say that he was just at the age of puberty at that time. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala lived an extended life, but he was still young enough where this was a turning point in his life, and he became a noble student of knowledge, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. All of this to say that Imam Malik showed us very clearly what it means to change your path. And sometimes we don't like to be called out, but we need to be called out. And sometimes, and this is going to hurt a little bit, and when I was saying that the other day in another halaqah, they're like, you never come and bring a halaqah without hurting us at least a little bit. And I was like, that's my job, right? Just go, make people uncomfortable and hurt them a little bit, and then say, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal corrects us through people that are unqualified to correct us. But Allah Azza wa Jal is qualified to correct us through people that are unqualified to correct us. And if Allah is correcting you through unqualified people, it doesn't change the qualification of the lesson that He's given you. And so be ready to take that tasheeh or that ta'adeel, that correction or rectification, no matter where Allah Azza wa Jal is giving it to us from. And you'll notice that even this early on, it's possible to say that Imam Malik had already gained enough knowledge to match the knowledge of his mother. Maybe not his father, but he was getting there, because he was sitting in halaqat ilm, the same circles of knowledge, more advanced circles of knowledge, and he's young. But he was still a shab, he was still a young person. And so, when you're young, even when you sometimes have the knowledge here, you don't have it internalized here. You don't have it sitting in you here. And so Imam Malik began to grow an interest in music, right? And so Imam Malik is like, kind of starting to vibe with the music scene. He's going to Quran class, but he's still vibing with the music scene. He's going to the halaqat of ilm, but like he's really like liking the beat, liking the rhythm, liking the flow, loving the poetry. He always had an interest in poetry and particularly the poetry that rhymed and these kind of things. And to the extent that he would go to these places, to the extent that his mother noticed, like, this is not a trend that's working. And so there's a story that may not be 2024 friendly, right? It may not be 2024 friendly, but it's very real. His mother came to him one day and she said, "Oh Malik," she said, "the singers that have good voices and good looks, they're highly successful. But the singers who even have better voices than them but don't have good looks, they never become popular." And Imam Malik sat there and he's like, "Man, my mom be subtweeting me. She's telling me that I don't have the looks. She's telling me this is not the right path for me." And then look at the rest of her statement. She said, "But the scholars that don't have good looks but have good knowledge, everyone flocks to benefit from them." And the examples are too many of scholars that had bodily deformities, had so many disabilities, had traits of them, both from a social status as well as a physical status, that were considered, less than ideal in their time, right? Even their ethnic background, their oriented. We'll talk about some of them, right? If they had the knowledge, that the leaders of their time came crawling to them. That the leaders of their time came crawling to them because of the knowledge that they had. That the most wealthy merchants of their time would come and sit at the feet of them. So she was accurate in her statement. That when you have knowledge, no matter the looks that you have or the abilities that you have or the ethnic background that you have, right? Or no matter the case, if you have knowledge, you have a currency that everybody wants to tap into. You have it made. Imam Malik was like, "Man, my mother's right." And so that day he took the advice of his mother and he decided to abandon these gatherings of music and to give more of himself to the gatherings of knowledge, lest it be that he can find there what he wouldn't be able to find in the gatherings of music that he may have hoped to attain. And this is why this is ironic? Because in our day and age, it's like, your children will have interests, love your children's interests, these kind of things. And there's truth to it, right? Everything is about balance and i'tidal. But if there becomes a contradiction between what Allah Azza wa Jal wants from us and what is best for our deen and dunya and akhirah, and if that becomes, it's all about priorities, it's all about awlawiyat, then we need to give priority to that which Allah Azza wa Jal gives us priority to. And this is something that is very evident in the example of Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala wa radi'an. And so the very next day, Imam Malik's mother dresses him, and this is a very famous story that we know about Imam Malik, and she tells him to go and study from who? From Rabi'a. She goes and she says, "Idhab ila Rabi'a wa ta'allam min adabihi qabla an tata'allam min ilmihi." Go to Rabi'a and learn from his adab before you learn from his knowledge. And she dressed him as a scholar on that day. And again, it's all about the standard that you set. Imam Malik lived, mashallah, 90 plus years. And part of what he never abandoned from his mother is that Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala always carried the esteem and the integrity and the dignity, what we call in Arabic hayba, right? Like this persona, if you will, of scholarship. And he learned it from a very, very young age from his mother, Aliya bint Shuraik. This woman who taught him from very early on to, in all essence, one could say, fake it till you make it. Act like a scholar and live like a scholar until you become a scholar. And that's something that, subhanAllah, we see Imam Malik growing up saying, this is the standard of who we want you to be. And if imposter syndrome is you pretending to be that until you get there, we want you to pretend it until you get there. And he went to the door of Rabi'a and he began to study. And these were the two major teachers of Al-Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, Rabi'a and Ibn Hurmuz. Rabi'a and Ibn Hurmuz were the two first teachers of Imam Malik. The irony of what his mother said to him is that in all humor, Imam Malik was actually incredibly good looking and uniquely good looking too. Because, and we're not trying to cause rifts or anything like that here, but he was considered very unique in that he was both blonde and white, while being Yemeni, while living in Medina. Like for you to be in Medina, and blonde, by the way, in Arabic, when you say someone is ashqar, it doesn't mean blonde in like the European view of blonde. What it really means is that they were not like, they didn't have like the harsh black hair. It's like a range of like brown and these kind of things. And even when they said that someone was white, it didn't mean that they were like the Euro white. It just meant that they were of a lighter complexion, right? And so he had, and you could tell that it was something that was of major abnormality at that time because it was a nickname that he was referred to often before he became like the Imam Malik. That part of it was that he was known for how white he was and how light-skinned he was, that there was a uniqueness to his look. And yet, his mother was so committed to his knowledge-seeking path that she planted the seed, even if it made her son uncomfortable, to say you would be far more valuable in this society if you were a student of knowledge, right? And thus began the path of seeking knowledge for Al-Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, wa radiya an. And she sent him out on that day when she dressed him as a scholar, and she allowed him to begin to spend the vast majority of his time sitting in the gatherings of knowledge. Now, where were these gatherings of knowledge? Al-Masjid al-Nabawi. Imam Malik studied there for 30 years, and then he taught there for 50 years. Like, think about how incredible that is. That he studied there for no less than 30 years, and then he taught there for no less than 50 years. And this is a testament to the greatness of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. It's because there was overlap between him being a student and him being a teacher. But even when he stepped into that, when he stepped into that masjid, what he found was not a masjid. What he found was a university. What he found was a platform for political activism and social justice. What he found was a hub of justice, and not just justice, but like jurisprudence. And what he found was the place that every issue of society was being addressed from there. And he spent every waking moment of his life in Al-Masjid al-Nabawi. And it could be argued that the barakah of the Maliki madhab could be found in the years that Imam Malik was just living mu'takif fi masjidi Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You just take me or you for example. Like I'm just an average Joe Muslim, and you put me in Al-Masjid al-Nabawi today, not that close to prophethood, not when the teachers of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, but when the teachers of Al-Masjid al-Nabawi are who we find today. And you just put me there not for 50 years. You put yourself there for 5 months. And you come back to good old Dearborn, Michigan and all of its good eatery, and you'll be a different person. This is the power of environments. This is the power of scholarship. This is the power of talab ilm. Imam Malik was living within the walls of Al-Masjid al-Nabawi day in and day out. And because of the hard work of his entrepreneur of a father who was making bows and arrows, his greatest priority every waking moment of his life was sitting at the feet of scholarship. To the extent that It was known that you could find him, that there was a rock in front of the house of Ibn Hurmuz that was known as the chair. It was just a rock. It was a rock that was at the door of Ibn Hurmuz. It was known as the chair of Malik, because he would sit at that door and he would just continuously wait there for Ibn Hurmuz to come out. And one time, subhanAllah, he was waiting there for so long, and finally he was just pacing back and forth, reviewing some of the hadith that he had covered, and Ibn Hurmuz did not even know that he was standing out there. So he told the woman in his house, he said, check to see who's standing at the door. And she said, it's the blonde one. She says, the blonde one. He said, let him in, id'ihi, bring him in, فَإِنَّهُ عَالِمُ زَمَانِهِ. He's going to be a scholar of his time. Bring him in. And he came in and he was given that VIP access to his teacher. Again and again and again. That he had a rock in front of the door of his teacher, known to be that student for that teacher. And this is powerful to mention, because Ibn Hurmuz was known to be, number one, not originally Arab, hence the name Hurmuz, that he was from the non-Arabs. Ibn Hurmuz was also known to have a physical disability. And Ibn Hurmuz was known to actually be either very hard of hearing or deaf. Right? And like that, perhaps at some point in time in his life, he completely lost his ability to hear. You just have to think about what kind of challenge that brought for Imam Malik to learn from him before he was Imam Malik, just as a young boy. And this is a testament to the type of commitment and dedication that he had. And it is known that Medina at that time had, by and large, one of the greatest concentrations of scholars at that time. That there were 40 in Medina that could give fatwa. There were 40 in Medina that could give fatwa. And at that point, and it's not like, like you're like, man, there's more than 40 that can give fatwa in Dearborn. Yeah, that's a different conversation for another day. But we're talking about 40 qualified individuals who inherited directly from the prophetic tradition that are giving fatwa. And Imam Malik was in that environment, but he was completely anchored and benefiting from Rabi'a and from benefiting from Ibn Hurmuz, to the extent that he remained in the state for an extended period of time. And Imam Malik later on in his life, he highlights the value of this. He says something quite powerful. He says, in one of the final experiences of the prophetic tradition, we hear of Ghazwat Tabuk. And in Tabuk, there were what averages to about 30,000 companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And they were spread out after that, but 10,000 of them lived in Medina. And these 10,000, everyone was drinking from their knowledge. Everyone was benefiting from their knowledge. He said, tell me of any other place that had 10,000 direct inheritors from the prophetic fountain of knowledge. No other place on the face of the earth. So the type of knowledge, and Imam Malik did this to give qualification to himself, to what he was sharing, and to his students and what they brought forward. All of this, for our context, is number one, it makes us love Medina. And number two, it makes us appreciate the Maliki madhab. And number three, it tells us the value of the environments that we place ourselves in. When you find yourself in a place like Miftaah and in some of the neighboring masajid, and you find scholar after scholar after scholar after scholar, my dear brother and sister, this is not something that should ever become normal for us. This is not something that we should ever take for granted. And Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to tell us, you live within an hour from such and such a scholar. You had this access to these workshops and seminars, that it was like a buffet for you, of where you are choosing to learn from. What did you do with that opportunity? And Imam Malik and his parents and his grandfather, all of them, and his uncles, all of them chose to value that opportunity for knowledge. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. SubhanAllah, I was just reflecting, I was mentioning that are wallahi our mashayikh and the ulama, the a'imma before us, their sacrifices are things that sometimes when you travel for dunya, you just given the context of the travels that they made for rida rabbil alameen, the type of sacrifices that they made to please Allah Azza wa Jal, and the type of challenges that they put themselves forward to, traveling by foot for days upon days upon days, just so that they can get one single hadith. Like that kind of reality is something that we can only imagine. If you're on your way to like visit family or go on vacation, you're like, imagine doing all of this for one hadith, right? And so we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to be pleased with them. As we were driving from Chicago, I thought about the travels of many of our ulama, and I thought about how Allah Azza wa Jal blessed us with generations of people that were willing to make sacrifices that we may struggle to make ourselves today. And alhamdulillah that our tradition came to them and they stood up to the plate, and through their efforts we have our deen. But how are folks holding up? That's just warming us back up into the session. How are people holding up? Any questions? Everyone's okay? Yes? His father was around, but it's known that Imam Malik, like his father was a present and active father, but also a businessman, but his mother was the murabbiya. Like his mother is the one who like, this is what you're doing, this is what you're not doing, right? And his father was also both a business person, in that he had like that skill of making the bows and arrows, but he was also a student of knowledge. And when the child is significantly younger, even back then, that child would spend the majority of their time with their mother. And so that's where that foundational knowledge was happening. Whereas later on, the father becomes more involved, especially when he would take him to the masjid and the halaqat of ilm and so on. And you always have to, with Imam Malik, always remember, when we say masjid, we mean al-masjid al-nabawi, right? And just think about how beautiful that scene must be for them to be going 3 generations seeking knowledge together, mashallah. Any other questions? Yes.
I had a question about when talking about the good relationship he had with his parents. Like, what conclusion have you come to from looking at other parts of their interactions as to what made him so open to their advice?
Quality time. Like, I think that a lot of times we want to be able to advise each other and correct each other without being with each other. Like when you have musahaba, like when you live life with one another, you earn the credibility to comment on each other's lives. But if you just show up, it's like the absent father who just comes in and he's like, eat like this, sleep like this, talk like this, live like this. It's like, bro, like who are you? Like you're just like the police that pulled me over. Like I don't know you, but you've come here to like give me all these tickets, right? But if there's like this coexistence and like they sought knowledge together and they did business together, they broke bread together, they lived together. This shows a level of shared life. And when you live together, you can impact life together. And that's something that the parents of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala wa anhum very clearly did well. And Imam Malik went on to do that as well with his teachers. And that's something that is shown in his commitment just to Ibn Hurmuz. In the example that we gave of him, valuing so much what his teacher is giving that he wanted not only the public class time, not only the private class time, because that's the way. You go into like these public majalis, and then the teacher sees within you an intelligence or a quality that says you're not only worthy of being in the public majlis, but you are going to be one of my students in the private majlis, right? And then when you become so valuable, then you have one-on-one time with the Shaykh as well. And Imam Malik went from just being an average young kid to being in these circles. And sometimes in the name of inclusivity, we want to break down all of those barriers. Where what we're really saying is we want to be at the very tippy top access to knowledge without taking any of the necessary steps to get there. right? And our tradition is one that is valuable, more valuable than any type of gold or silver in this dunya. So you're going to have to climb that ladder, right? We talk about climbing the corporate ladder. Why would it make sense to climb the corporate ladder but not to climb the path to knowledge? Which one is more valuable? The path to knowledge. So how are we going to assume that the path of financial prosperity, we can call it, which is really just different forms of financial enslavement in this capitalistic culture, but regardless of that, you're willing to climb that corporate ladder tooth and nail and the Hunger Games it like every man, woman, and child for themselves. When it comes to knowledge, we want every single individual to have full access to the peak of knowledge. The reality is that there are ladders to climb and there are steps to take and there are sacrifices to be made. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, he showed us that. And you also have to be ready to take knowledge from the most unexpected of places or from situations that make you uncomfortable. And Ibn Hurmuz rahimahullah ta'ala was a great scholar of our tradition, but he was a non-Arab living in Medina who had a physical disability and became hard of hearing, and none of that took Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala from being a person who prioritized learning from him. To the extent that, as we mentioned before we took the break, that there was a known stone that was later referred to as the chair of Malik, that was just sitting at the doorstep of the house of his teacher, Ibn Hurmuz rahimahullah ta'ala. And all of this gives us some insight into the type of commitment and dedication that we see from Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. But it doesn't stop there, because what Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala also had access to is Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala also had access to Allahumma salli Sayyidina Muhammad, Nafi'. Now Nafi' is unique in the fact that Nafi' is the Mawla, or was like the freed slave of Abdullah ibn Umar. And so what did he have that very little people had? He had direct ahadith that he could give Nafi' from Abdullah ibn Umar from Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So, but there was a unique trait of Nafi' that many people may not be able to tolerate, which is that Nafi' was a very reserved individual. And he particularly did not have a thing for like young kids. Like it just wasn't his thing. And that's why we have to see like scholars come in all shapes and colors. Sometimes people will come back and they just went to Umrah with this school or that school and they ran into this Shaykh or that Shaykh. And I look at their face and they're devastated. And I'm like, why are you devastated? They're like, man, I was in the middle of the clock tower in Umrah and I ran into this famous Shaykh that has like 1 million plus followers. And man, he did not rub me, like he did not give me good vibes. And it's like at the end of the day, he's a person. He's tired. He recently did Umrah. He's traveling. And why does he have to be Santa Claus the one moment in your life that you meet him? He doesn't have to be that. Nafi' was a scholar who was a student of one of the greatest Sahaba, right? And he was, and that makes him a tabi'i. And he was an individual that was known for his piety and his righteousness, and that he had specific and exclusive access to hadith that others did not have. And yet he was a very no-nonsense person, and he was a person that was particularly reserved in nature, and he was an individual that was not particularly fond of having very young children in his halaqah. For all intents and purposes, Nafi' rahimahullah ta'ala and many of the scholars of our past would be canceled based off of cancel culture today, because they just don't fit the bill of being super warm and fuzzy all the time. And this is in all the madhahib, you will find individuals like this. And did Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala go and cry to his mom and find the local board member, then have his mom speak to that board member and say like, this Imam, like he's not really acting the right way and like he needs to be like cool and hip and all of these things, right? No, none of those things happen. Imam Malik himself strategized of how to work through the particular personality traits of Imam Nafi' rahimahullah ta'ala. How did he do that? He said, I used to leave around the Dhuhr time, and I used to camp out around the house of Imam Nafi'. And then I would just hang out around there until Imam Nafi' came out. Then I would say salam to him. But I knew that he was reserved and didn't want to be bothered. So I'd let him walk to the masjid all alone. But in his mind, he said, oh, there's that little cute polite kid that said salam to me. And then he left me alone. Thank God he left me alone. And then he would go to the masjid. He said, I'd be waiting for him, sitting at the foot of his chair, sitting quietly, waiting for him to come. And as he is getting ready to sit down, before the dars formally begins, I'd ask him questions that no one else had the time to ask him. And so I became not just a student of the Shaykh, but I became the one who had early access to the Shaykh. And it was all because on a daily basis, he said I would stand outside of his house and there were no trees around town, because that's the way it works in these life situations. To the extent that his sister said, I used to feel so bad for Malik that he would sit there fully dressed like a scholar, with the turban, with the robe on top of the robe, dressed like a proper talib ilm, if not like a scholar in and of his own regard, pacing back and forth, more or less, forgive me for this word, stalking Imam Nafi', waiting for him to come out, just to say salam to him, then wait for him to go to the masjid. Then while the Shaykh is getting situated in his chair, a little bit of a mic check, while they're doing the mic check without there even being a mic, he's asking the Shaykh questions as things are getting situated and students are there. And now people are like, man, this guy has early access and he has that access to knowledge. All of this to let us know that in our path to knowledge, we're going to run into personalities, we're going to run into predicaments. None of them are going to be easy. Not all of them are going to be particularly easy, but all of them will require us to show what? How committed we are to knowing this deen, and how much we're willing to sacrifice, and how humble we are going to be as we explore this tradition. And that is something that we see became very, very clear with Imam Malik and Nafi'. And that's why, subhanAllah, they say there's what is referred to as a silsila dhahabiyya. When a hadith comes to you from Imam Malik, an Nafi', عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهم عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, this is called the golden chain. Anytime you see a hadith like this. And this would only come to us because of what? Because of experiences like this. Of a young student of knowledge hunting down and stalking his teacher and having those moments with his teacher. Until today, if you go to North Africa and you go to Medina and you go to Egypt, you go to Azhar, and you go to Pakistan and other places where there are scholars and students of knowledge, you will find for every teacher the likes of Imam Malik, who are hunting them down, stalking them, standing at their doors, and doing everything they can, giving them rides to the airport, right? Picking them up. All of this is to what? To have a few moments of seeking knowledge. And this is something that we learn from Imam Malik, rahimahullahu ta'ala wa radiya anhu. And one of the things that is important to know is the more that you familiarize yourself with the teachers of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, the more you realize why Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, became who he was. For example, you'll notice that Nafi' was a mawla. Nafi' was a mawla, meaning that he was a freed slave. And yet he was placed by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz as what? He was placed as the Shaykh or the go-to mufti of the lands of Egypt. And this is a testament of what happens when you commit yourself to knowledge. Now, Imam Malik is a young student of knowledge, and he's witnessing that his teacher was once a slave, who then became freed, who then became the mufti of Medina. He's seeing what his mother said come to life. That you can have all these things stacked up against you, but if you are a student of knowledge, it will give you something that nothing else in life gives you. And it's as if he's witnessing the nasiha or the guidance of his mother coming to life before his eyes. And not only that, but there is no hadith that is referred to in the way that a narration that comes to us عن رسول الله عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهم عن نافع مولى عبد الله بن عمر عن Imam Malik. And then now you have an addition that there are narrations that come from Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. That you have Al-Imam al-Shafi'i عن معلمه الإمام مالك, right? عن معلمه عن معلمه إمام نافع عن معلمه عبد الله بن عمر عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. That's like not even silsila dhahabiyya. That's silsila dhahabiyya with the cherry on top. Because now you've added Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. And this is all possible that Allah Azza wa Jalla elevates a people no matter their background through their ability to commit to studying the hadith. And amongst the other teachers of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala that's worth noting is Ibn Shihab. And Ibn Shihab was in fact one of the greatest scholars at the time of Imam Malik. To the extent that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala at the end of the day transition from being a student of Rabi'a to being that him and Rabi'a are going to study from Ibn Shihab together. And one of the senior scholars at that time, his name was Ibn Dinar. And he said about Ibn Shihab, who is this Ibn Shihab that everyone keeps talking about? Ibn Dinar was older, so he had spent more time with the Sahaba. He said, how is he bringing all of these riwayat, all of these ahadith, when he's so young? Ibn Dinar was so old, but when he heard of the knowledge of Ibn Shihab, he had them carry him on their backs over to Ibn Dinar was so old that he had them carry him to Ibn Shihab. And he went and he sat there and he said, I don't know of many that have knowledge the likes of Ibn Shihab. Why? Because Ibn Shihab was a Makki, a Qurashi, who had a special access to many of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, or many of the children of the Sahaba radwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'een. And so he was able to gather a lot of this knowledge. Ibn Shihab had moved to Medina after having lived away for an extended period of time. When he moved to Medina, everybody and their mama wanted to learn from Ibn Shihab. And so Imam Malik was in a predicament again. Why? Because he's like, why? I don't just want to be a student of knowledge. I don't want to be that guy sitting in the back. I want to be the top student of Nafi'. I want to be the top student of Rabi'a. I want to be the top student of Ibn Hurmuz. And now I want to be the top student of who? Of Ibn Shihab. So what does he do? Look at this commitment to knowledge. This is what makes Imam Malik Imam Malik. It was the day of Eid. Salat al-Eid finished. Everybody goes home. What is Imam Malik's thought process? Imam Malik's thought process is what? If everybody's going home to their families, nobody's going to Ibn Shihab's house. So he goes and he knocks on the door of Ibn Shihab. One of the funny things that one of our mashayikh he says the story of Imam Malik is that he always finds himself at the door of people. Right? If he's not at the door of Ibn Hurmuz, he's at the door of Nafi'. If he's not at the door of Nafi', he's at the door of Ibn Shihab. And he's just rotating between these doors because he wants exclusive access to all of these scholars. Why? So he can get their autograph, so he can take a selfie and post it on social media. No big deal hanging out with the mashayikh at the cafe. No. And it shows what happens next. He walks into the house of Ibn Shihab. Ibn Shihab, he says, you know it's Eid, right? He says, yeah. He says, didn't you pray? He said, yeah. He says, you didn't go home to eat with your family? He said, no. Because that's the tradition is that after Salat al-Eid, you go home and eat with your family. So Ibn Shihab is like this poor guy. He probably is poor. He's financially poor. So he probably doesn't have food to go home to. So he's come to me because people used to show like generosity to ulama by giving them food, right? And so he put food in front of Imam Malik. And Imam Malik was like, no, this is not what I'm here for. You have to think about he's taking risk here. He's sitting in front of a shaykh and the shaykh is offering him food. He says, yeah, shaykh, this is not what I'm here for. He said, what did you come here for? They've never met before in person. Like this is the longest conversation they've ever had. He said, I came here to inherit knowledge from you, not to eat food from you. And so he says, what do you want? He says, I want, حدثني مما عندك. He says, tell me from what you have with you. And so Ibn Shihab is like, it's Eid. You came right after Eid. I'm supposed to be eating with my family. I thought you were hungry. I gave you food. Now you're telling me you're not going to give you the food. You're not going to eat the food that I gave you. وبعدين معك, you want hadith kaman. So he starts giving him hadith. Imam Ibn Shihab, rahimahullah ta'ala, he shows, number one, the depth of his knowledge. And number two, he shows his generosity. He doesn't give him one hadith. He doesn't give him 3 hadith. He doesn't even give him 11 hadith. These are like, you go from Costco samples to the whole Costco pack. He gives him 40 hadith. He gives him a complete bundle. And he says, here are your 40 hadith. Allah ma'ak. Tawakkal ala Allah. Go home. Pack your bags. Take the food if you want. Leave. I gave you 40 hadith. Kul aam wa tabkhir. It's Eid. Right? Leave me alone. And he says, Shaykh, حدثني مما عندك. Zidni. Give me more. He says, when you know the 40, come to me and I'll give you more, inshallah. Ma tshil ham, yani, don't worry about it. He says, but I already know the 40 that you gave me. I already know the 40 that you gave me. He said, no, I just gave them to you. I'm not talking about the 40 that I gave in the halaqah. I said, know the 40 that I just gave you, then come back. He said, I can say them to you now, and he gave them all 40 right then and there, only hearing them once. And Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri rahimahullah ta'ala, he was just as much as the students were committed to looking for good teachers, Ibn Shihab was committed to finding good students. And that day, he chose Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala to be one of his closest students. And so that day he says, اذهب فأنت من أوعية العلم. He said, go, for indeed Allah will use you as a vessel of knowledge, that you will pour knowledge wherever you go. And this is important, that some of us may be teachers, that it's not only important to be a good student, it's equally important that when you are a teacher, that you be an incredible teacher. Your teacher saw something in you, see something in your students. And if all you do is criticize your students and beat them up and tell them how much they suck, then Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, valued his teachers and his teachers valued him. And this is an important trait, and that's how he became a student of Ibn Shihab rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an. So he became a student of Ibn Shihab and of Nafi' and Rabi'a, right? And Ibn Hurmuz. These are 4 of the major teachers of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. The 5th and last teacher that we'll mention, even though there are far, far, far too many more, is Imam Ja'far. And they say that what he learned most from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa rahimahullah is that he learned from Imam Ja'far the adab and the zuhd of Imam Ja'far. Because of course Imam Ja'far is from Ahlul Bayt. He's from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there were some traits, like subhanallah, like you always take some of your teacher. You always take some of your teacher. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. You always carry some of your teacher with you, right? So for example, it is known that Imam Ja'far, when he would laugh, he would never laugh in a super loud way. Like the extent that you would see is that he would chuckle to himself. And this was something that was carried on with Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. Also, another trait is that he was a very light-hearted individual. He was a very easy, soft-spoken, very what's the best way in English to describe it? Is that he was like just an easy person to be around. Some of the teachers of Imam Malik were very no-nonsense individuals. But Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq rahimahullah ta'ala was known to be just very easygoing, very laid back, very accommodating, like a person of the people, right? And that was a trait that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala learned from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. But the most notable trait of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala inherited from him is that he would completely change when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was mentioned. he would change. It's as if he entered the room. He would change the way he was sitting. He would lower his voice. Like his demeanor, his aura, everything about him would like become more upright at the mention of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that was something that was noticed in Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, and it was noticed that it was something that he inherited from Imam Ja'far rahimahullah ta'ala radiyallahu anhu. And similarly, we ought to strive for this. In fact, you could tell, they said from a distance, you could tell if Al-Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala was teaching hadith or teaching one of the other sciences. Because his demeanor, his persona, the way that he presented himself when he was teaching hadith was different than when he was doing some other type of knowledge, out of his reverence for Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And the last teacher, and subhanAllah, the way that I've looked at it is that every teacher of his highlighted a personality trait of Imam Malik. Right? Isn't that amazing? And and this is the way that we do. And that's why it's not good to compare your teachers to each other. Know that if Allah Azza wa Jal that has brought you a teacher, He's brought you some type of goodness in your teacher. And even if all your teacher taught you was one ayah of the Quran, sa'atan min nahar. Right? Some people, they outgrow their teacher in certain ways. And because you outgrew your teacher in some ways, you think that your teacher is no longer your teacher. And this is a problematic thing, because if every teacher will teach you so much more than the knowledge that they give you. But you have to be ready to receive from the entire package of what they deliver to you, right? And so one of the things that he learned from a teacher that we haven't mentioned, who's an incredible scholar of our tradition, Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir, and inshallah, I'm inspired by this series of the 4 Imams, that after perhaps we can just do Imams or ulama ajilla, because there's so many of them that it is an injustice really. And perhaps we can inshallah ta'ala spend time creating within our communities a culture of knowing these scholars and loving these scholars, and even naming our family after them, and connecting their personalities, the personalities of the people of our lives today, with the scholars of the past. But one of the things that Muhammad ibn al-Munkadir rahimahullah ta'ala was known for is that he was known that as much as he was a person of knowledge, he was a person of khidmah. He was a person of service. And when he was asked by one of his students, what is the most important thing we do? He said, إِدْخَالُ السُّرُورِ وَالْيُسْرِ عَلَى أَخِيكَ. He says, bringing happiness and ease to your brother or sister. This is the best thing that you can do. He's an allama. He's a scholar in his own regard. And he says, the best thing that you can do is bring happiness and ease to your brother or sister. And this was evident in Imam Malik, because Imam Malik exemplified this in that Imam Malik became one of the greatest financial providers for the students of knowledge of Medina. That he funded them himself. I just want you to imagine this. He was the Shaykh, he was their Shaykh, and he was also their source of finances. And this was something that became very, very, kind of like an investment that he had in his students, that as a result of it, his madhab was thriving and his students were thriving as well. And that is because when he saw students of his struggling, he invested in them not just with his time, not just with his knowledge, but he invested with them in his finances as well. And of course, that is a sadaqah jariyah as well for his family as well. Now, one of the things that people love to say about Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, which I personally love to say about Imam Malik, is that Imam Malik was a person whose interpretation of zuhud was different than what we often think of zuhud to be, right? So when we think of zuhud, what comes to mind? Driving a beat up car, wearing the same thobe for 4 days in a row, ila akhirihim. Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala viewed zuhud to be not what you owned, but instead what owned you. It was not about how much you had financially, but instead it was based off of the dynamic that you had with your wealth. And so Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala would always say, present the favors of Allah Azza wa Jal that He's given you. Put them forward. If Allah has given you wealth, dress like you have wealth. If Allah has given you good sense, wear those good sense. And it was something that he carried in every part of his life. His clothing, his ride. He wore very expensive clothing. He had one of the best of sense, to the extent that it was even in his house, that he had a nice house, that in front of his house, in fact, it's a tradition that still exists in the Middle East today, where in front of the house you have a plaque that says, Ma sha Allah, la quwwata illa billah. This actually comes from the Malikiyya and from Imam Malik himself, that he had a plaque in front of his house that said, Ma sha Allah. And when they told him, why do you have this plaque? He says, because Allah Azza wa Jal, He says in the Quran, وَلَوْلَا إِذْ دَخَلْتَ جَنَّتَكَ قُلْتَ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And my house is my Jannah in this dunya. And so I want to celebrate the Jannah that Allah gave me in this dunya before the Jannah He gives me in the Akhirah. So he was fully comfortable in his interpretation of zuhud, of enjoying the ni'am of Allah Azza wa Jal very, very comfortably. In the clothing that he wore, in the turban that he had, in the sense that he had, and even in the food that he ate. It said that he insisted that every day his family had some form of meat. Some form of meat, which as much as that's common for us, that right now you'll go home and there will be both beef, chicken, and fish at the same time. At their time, this was not a common phenomenon. Instead, it was something that was rare. And yet, Imam Malik held this standard of financial prosperity. And he did it to showcase, number one, that it was permissible. Number two, that it is not a problem to have an abundance of wealth, but that when you have this abundance of wealth, it should be that you own the wealth and not that the wealth owns you. And not just so that you can have a poster in your house that says, I own my wealth doesn't own me, but that the principles of life that you live by showcase that you are someone that is not owned by your wealth. Because even though he had that raha, he had that wealth, he had that house, he had that ride, he had that thobe, he had that itr, all of the signatures of luxury, no one dared accuse him of being materialistic. You see, there's a difference. Was he wealthy? Yes. Was he living large according to the standards of his times? Absolutely. But was he dunya oriented? No debate that was not his personality. That he was not a person that was living for the dunya. And this is something that was evident in in not just the wealth that he owned, but in how he used the wealth. And it's important to know that having wealth has just as many opportunities to ta'ah, to obedience and goodness, just as much as having wealth has opportunities for disobedience. So for example, Imam Malik and Al-Imam Al-A'zam, Al-Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, both had weekly majalis in their homes, where they would invite their students, they would host them for dinner, they would give them private nasiha, and they would let them go. And this was a part of their diyafa, their hospitality, that they would have this type of hospitality to the mashayikh. Imagine if the shaykh was poor, would he be able to host them? So one could even argue that part of the benefit that we get from the wealth of Imam Malik is that as a result of that, his students had a loyalty to him because he was their financial advisor. He was the one funding them. He was their investor. And because he was the one, rahimallahu ta'ala, that was hosting them and mentoring them and loving them. So the wealth of Imam Malik and the family of Imam Malik actually afforded him to preserve his madhab, right? So when your parents tell you, become successful financially and be a student of knowledge, this, while it seems like a cop-out, it's actually the way that Islamic tradition truly was. That people had a stable source of income, right? That wasn't coming from some board that wants to control you, right? They had an external financial source of income, and at the same time that they were autonomous in their seeking of knowledge and teaching of knowledge and spreading of knowledge and Islamic impact on the world around them. And Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala radiyan, he embodied this. One of the most profound characteristics of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, is his hayba. And his hayba is one that was so unique that people wrote poetry about it. And to the extent that some of the tabi'een who were significantly older than Imam Malik were astounded by the hayba that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala carried. Very, very different from some of the other Imams. And we said that hayba is a Arabic word that indicates the integrity, the persona, the aura of Imam Malik, was that he carried himself like a scholar. Like one of the things that's unique about Imam Malik is that you couldn't catch him in the marketplace. Very different from Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa used to camp out in the marketplace. And hey, this is haram. This is not okay. You need to do it like this. He used to just be with the people, immersed in the people, engaging with the people. Very different cultures. We're not here to say that one is right or one is wrong. But we're here to say that every shaykh has his touch. Every imam has his barakah. And all of them are shining different parts of the prophetic legacy. All of them are doing it in their own ways. And Imam Malik's hayba was uniquely felt, particularly in his halaqat of ilm. To the extent that when people said, bring your halaqah here, when even the rulers said, bring your halaqah here, he said, no. You come to knowledge, knowledge does not come to you. And this is a trait of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala that we find in some of our mashayikh, that the more knowledge you have, the more that you need to embody this type of hayba. And that this type of hayba, this type of persona or aura, is that the people who are seekers of knowledge and students of knowledge should carry themselves at a higher standard than the masses. This is very important to define. This does not mean that you are better than anybody. This does not mean that you are not amongst the masses, but it means that the standards that you have with Allah Azza wa Jal is something different than what is normalized within a society. So you may eat differently, you may speak differently, you may engage with people differently, but all of this is out of respect for the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal gave you. It's not a testament of your superiority. It's a superiority of the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal gave you, and you carry yourself with this demeanor as a result of that. And one of the things that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala showed us is this hayba produced students of great commitment. And an example of that is Ibn Wahb. And his student Ibn Wahb was, subhanAllah, one of the students of Imam Malik, that when he heard about Imam Malik, he left Egypt and traveled to Medina just to study from Imam Malik. And what you'll begin to see, subhanAllah, we're already crossing into the finish line of our session, and we only covered the traits of Imam Malik through his teachers and the introduction of his family dynamic, story of my life, right? That we always only touch the surface. وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدُ عَلَى كُلِّ حَالٍ. But one of the things that we learn about the student of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, Ibn Wahb, is that you'll begin to see كَمَا تُدِينُ تُدَانُ. That the type of student you are to your teachers is the type of students you will have as a teacher. And so the students begin, you go through the students of Imam Malik, they have the same type of dynamic with Imam Malik that he had with Ibn Hurmuz and that he had with Nafi'. You have students at the doorstep of Imam Malik camping out, waiting to be let into his house. You have students who are in need of private time with Imam Malik, and one of them is Ibn Wahb. And Ibn Wahb one time was in a gathering of Imam Malik, and while they were just about to get started with the halaqah of sharing hadith, Imam Malik is just about to begin, and Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, and then someone opens the door of the masjid. What masjid is this again? Masjid al-Nabawi. And some guy calls into the masjid and he says, Filun fil Medina. There's an elephant in Medina. Like everyone pull out your cell phones, right? Like this is a big moment. There's an elephant in Medina. And most of the people in Medina at that time had done what? had not left Medina. So they all rush out of Masjid al-Nabawi. The grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is there. Right? So, Imam Malik is sitting right there. And all of the students leave. And Imam Malik is in fact the narrator of the story. He says, no one remained except Ibn Wahb. And he said, don't you want to go see the elephant? He says, I did not leave my mother and my father and my community and all of in the lands of Egypt to come here and see an elephant. He said, I came here to see you, and I came here to see the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what I came here for. To give salam to the Prophet ﷺ and to learn from you. And subhanAllah, there's a narration of Imam Malik with Ibn Shihab, in which he says, I am not here on the day of Eid to eat your food. I am only here to do what? To see you and get your knowledge. Kama tudinu tudan. The type of student that you are is the type of student you end up getting. So when you choose to be a strong student of knowledge, inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gifts us with being good teachers as well, and blessed with good students ourselves. And since we are mentioning Ibn Wahb as well, Ibn Wahb, he says, I studied with Imam Malik for how many years? He says, I studied with Imam Malik for 20 years. This is the famous saying. He said, I learned from him knowledge in how many years? 1 year. And I learned from his adab, from his usloob, for how many years? 19 years. He said, after the first year, I felt like I got the gist of what he has to offer of knowledge. But 19 years I gained from his knowledge. 19 years I gained from his adab, rather. And this is to tell us that, again, as we mentioned before, every teacher will bring you some type of khair. And not to compare our teachers to think that all of them need to provide the same thing, and not to close doors with any one of our teachers. Because maybe Allah Azza wa Jal has allowed you to finish learning one particular science from them. Maybe you learn Quran from them, and you finish the Quran, and now you want to go to someone else. But there is some type of debt that you have with them. And that's why the students of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, they said about Imam Malik, they said about him that we are indebted to him greater than anyone in our life. Multiple students said this. They said they said that he is our hujjah amam Allah, that he is our proof in front of Allah that we gave our lives to study this deen from him. Look at that type of commitment to stay with a shaykh, to be patient with him, to benefit from him in every facet of who he was. We need to begin to wrap up, even though subhanAllah, we only spoke of his teachers and we didn't speak much about his students, and his students are incredible beacons of light, and that's why I'm hoping that we can do a series on many more of the scholars. But there's a particular part of Imam Malik that is worth noting, which is every scholar from the four Imams dealt with political turmoil and social unrest in a uniquely different way. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala is no stranger to that. And one of the things that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala lived through was a time of social unrest that led to a like what could be referred to as like a revolution of sorts. And the leaders at that time were functioning under the banner of like an Islamically legitimate governance, right? And so what they used to do is they used to try to legitimize themselves through what? Through bringing on scholarship as their stamps of approval. And so one of the governors, he was trying to put Imam Malik in a very awkward position. And he said to Imam Malik, he said, what do you have to say about people that revolt against their leader? And Imam Malik is like, we're in the middle of a revolution. People are revolting, they're protesting against the leader. And he's saying, the specific question is a very powerful one, and it is a highly volatile one. He says, what do you say about fighting the individuals or killing the individuals that are protesting and revolutionizing against a leader? And Imam Malik is right there, and his own neighbors are participating in a revolution, and the governor is right there, and his response impacts a lot of things. And so he says, if they are ruling the way Umar ibn Abdul Aziz used to rule, then revolting against that leader would be sinful, and it would be legitimate. It would be legitimate for them to be fought. Is everyone with me? Right? So you have people that are revolting, and you have the leader at the time putting Imam Malik on the spot in a courthouse in front of everyone to be present. And he says, what is the ruling against fighting against these who are protesting, right? I can think of all the modern day scenarios that are flashing before your mind, right? And he says, what do you say about this? And this is going to impact you, O Imam Malik. And Imam Malik has, the community on one side, and he has this leader on one side. And he says, if you rule the way that, if an individual rules the way that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz ruled, then it would be impermissible for people to revolt against him, and it would be permissible to fight against those people that are causing a revolution. So he's flipping the script to say, are you ruling like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz in order for people to need to obey you the way that you want them to obey you? And then he says, what if they don't rule like, look at the jur'ah or the audacity of this leader. He says, what if they don't rule like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? He says, if they don't rule like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, then the matter is even easier. He says, then they are from the zalimeen, and typically Allah destroys the zalimeen with other zalimeen, and then Allah destroys both of them. And the leader did not like, the governor at that time did not like that answer, because what is he saying? He says, if you're not going to rule like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, then you are, in a sense, an oppressor, and Allah has His way of dealing with the oppressors. Allah has the oppressors destroy each other, and we're witnessing it in real time today, the oppressors destroying themselves and destroying each other. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to destroy the oppressors. One time I was making dua in a gathering, oh Allah, destroy the oppressors. And a brother came up to me afterwards and he said, you need to be a little bit more gentle with your dua. I said, brother, you must be an oppressor, because you wouldn't be so uncomfortable. Like, we are very firm in that we make dua against the oppressors, and unless you are either an oppressor or you are a sympathizer of the oppressor, and do you really want to stand in front of Allah Azza wa Jal as a sympathizer of the oppressor? And we ask Allah Ta'ala to protect us. So this governor did not like this response of Imam Malik. And even though Imam Malik found, with his intelligence and his gift, he found a way to answer the question that more or less put the governor on the spot rather than put Imam Malik on the spot. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala was punished, physically assaulted in front of the masses, to the extent that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala's shoulder was dislocated and marks were left on his body. As an older man, it's said that he was older than 80 years old at this time. And he's being put on the spot like this by a governor. And he's going through physical torture and abuse and humiliation because of some young governor who was trying to flex that I call the shots, you don't call the shots. And Medina was on the brink of an all-out revolution now, and was going to pull out of was going to basically revolt against this leader, if it wasn't for the fact that the Khalifa stepped in and he came and he formally and personally apologized to Imam Malik, and he gifted Imam Malik, and he removed this flexing young governor. He removed him from his position. All of this because Allah Azza wa Jal wanted to preserve the honor of Imam Malik. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to restore the position of people of knowledge. And this is just an example of how all of the Imams dealt with political unrest and social instability and governance and leadership in different ways. But each of them taught us a different strategy that we as the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in 2024 need to learn from and adopt and practice parts of it. And part of what we learn from Imam Malik is the importance of being strategic, being intentional, being mindful, and being proactive in how you address issues as opposed to being passive in the way that you do. And subhanAllah, I really try to be punctual, even though subhanAllah we didn't particularly start on time. But there's so much to be said about Imam Malik as a father as well. and the type of father that he was. And one of the greatest tragedies that you have is that a lot of times people that are ulama lose the title of being proper fathers or mothers. This is a thing that sometimes happens, that they're so committed to teaching knowledge and gaining knowledge that they may at times lose the balance of being present individuals and figures in their family lives. And subhanAllah, Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala is a phenomenal example of an individual who allowed his journey of seeking knowledge and teaching knowledge to perfect who he was with his family, as opposed to tainting who he was with his family, to the extent that his madhab is preserved through his own descendants. His madhab is preserved through his own descendants, and this is a lesson amongst many. And Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala lived an extended life until he was about 92, 93 years old, in which he was teaching and sharing knowledge and being a source of ilm for all those around him. I know that we can do 3 more sessions on Imam Malik, and maybe that's something that we could do. We can revisit these ulama and expand upon it. But for the sake of time, inshallah ta'ala, we will stop here and we'll open up the floor for questions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower Al-Imam Malik, Imam Dar al-Hijra, with mercy and forgiveness. We beg Allah Azza wa Jal to expand the reward of Imam Malik for every letter of hadith. Of course, he authored the Muwatta, and he brought so much khair through his fiqh, and the uniqueness of the preservation of the traditions of Medina that we have through Imam Malik. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to honor him the way that he honored Medina. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to honor him through Medina. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he unites him with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the gardens of Jannah, and all of us be with him. هذا والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.